10 days after the surgeon stitched steel into my spine, my daughter stood over me and said, "We are not your servants," like I was an appliance that stopped working. I was flat on my own couch in Westwood, Cincinnati, the December light thin and colorless through the blinds, the pain in my lower back ringing steady as a power line. Tyler stood behind her, tapping at his phone like a woodpecker, eyes skating past me to the mantel where my wife's photo still sits. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. This one's about a house paid off in 2007, a daughter I raised to double knot her laces, and the kind of betrayal that hides under good intentions. The oven timer dinged somewhere in the kitchen, a lonely sound. Emily lifted a mug from the coffee table without looking at me. "You can heat your own meals, Dad," she said. "You're not helpless." I stared at the walker parked like an old dog by the couch and said nothing. The college game on TV was muted. The announcer's mouth moved around words I couldn't hear. I reached for the pill organizer and found yesterday's compartment still full. Today's missing 2. My dosage schedule, faxed from the surgeon's office at 11:42 a.m. on December 5th, was taped to the fridge. I'd underlined antibiotic with food. When they left, Tyler first, Emily last, I listened to the house breathe. The heater coughed. The clock in the hallway ticked. I forced myself upright and shuffled to the kitchen, following a track in the rug where someone had dragged a box. On the counter sat a crumpled piece of paper with a logo I didn't recognize. A home staging company. Estimate $2,800, dated December 6th, my name at the top. Under it, a lawn cleanup invoice for $220. December 9th, I hadn't ordered either. I didn't need my grass vitalized in the middle of winter. Out of habit, I slipped both into my Bible, pressed between the book of Job and a photograph of my wife holding lilies on our front steps. The paper felt heavy, like it knew what it was worth. I opened the front door and let December sting my face. Across the street, Mrs. DeLuca was hauling a salt bag from her trunk. "You all right, Jim?" she called. "Saw a white SUV with a realty magnet yesterday. Thought you had company." I smiled a lie and said I was fine. Back inside, the doorbell camera's tiny red eye glowed. I scrolled its clips. Shadows on the porch, voices fuzzed by cold air, Tyler saying the word off-market on December 5th at 9:23 p.m. like he was ordering pizza. I saved the file to a little silver USB I keep in a dish by the keys, labeled Christmas Reds. Because grief makes you superstitious and misdirection kept Tyler's curious hands off my things. I stood in the kitchen and looked around the room I wired myself 25 years ago. The house was my pension, my plan, my peace. Every receipt was a rung on the ladder out of overtime. Every Saturday project, a deposit in what my wife and I used to call the forever account. Now there was a staging estimate with my name and someone else's handwriting on it. I circled the amount, $2,800, with a blue pen and set it beside the fax dosage sheet, like 2 witnesses waiting to be sworn in. The winter light thinned further. I lay back carefully, the sutures pulling like tight stitches in a jacket. Not tonight, I told the empty room, but the truth was already inside the house. The truth was a whisper on a porch mic, a crumple of paper left on a counter, and the echo of my daughter's voice saying she wasn't my servant, while she set the table for a sale I never agreed to. Pain teaches you what helpless sounds like. For me, it was the small grunt I made at 6:10 a.m. on Friday, December 5th, when I tried to stand without the walker and folded like a bad card trick. The living room swam. I gripped the arm of the couch and waited for the throb in my lower back to stop flashing white. Outside, Cincinnati was still dark. Somewhere a plow clattered past, throwing salt like pocket change against the curb. The microwave. Clock read 6:12. I hobbled to the fridge and stared at the paper I'd taped there the day before, the dosage schedule, the nurse. Faxed from the surgeon's office at 11:42 a.m. Take antibiotic with food, underlined twice in my shaky blue. My pill organizer sat on the counter like a calendar you can't argue with. Thursday's antibiotic untouched. Last night's pain meds short by 2. I counted again because counting felt like control. 2 missing. Not a math error, not a fog. Missing. When Emily came by near 11, she put a grocery bag on the table and started talking to her phone about a return policy. She didn't look at the schedule or the empty slot. "I grabbed you soup," she said. "Tyler says we should be thinking about downsizing once you're up." She didn't say why. She didn't have to. His voice had already said it on my porch camera, off market. He'd said it like the words tasted good. "You can leave the soup," I told her. "I'll heat it." She lifted her chin like I'd proved some point. "Good," she said. "We're not your servants." There it was again, the sentence that took the breath out of the room. She kissed the air beside my cheek, left her perfume in the draft by the door, and was gone. I stood by the window and watched a white SUV with a vinyl logo glide away. It was the same car Mrs. DeLuca had mentioned, the same car I suddenly hated. I ate 4 spoonfuls of chicken noodle just to square up with the antibiotic and laid back with the TV on mute again, men running a fast break across a silent court. The house made its winter noises, the furnace flipping on with a click, the faint whistle from the old kitchen window. The noises I loved, the ones that mean home, now sounded like a clock counting down to something I didn't choose. Panic is a flavor. It sits metallic on the tongue. I dialed the surgeon's office, left a message about the missed antibiotic, and 10 minutes later, a nurse with the trained calm of a pilot talked me back to the checklist. "Eat a little, take it now, note the time," she said. "And don't get up without your walker." I wrote 12:03 p.m. next to antibiotic on the fax. It looked official enough to hold my spine together. At 1:30, Frank called from the Union Hall. "How's the back, old wire bender?" he asked. "Like it's holding up the Brent Spence Bridge by itself," I said. He laughed, then his voice softened, the way men who pull cable for 30 years learn to do around pain. I told him just the surface. Pressure to move, talk of downsizing, how it felt like I'd slipped and didn't remember falling. He didn't push. He said, "Paper wins. When you can sit at a table, we'll get you a lawyer who uses a pencil like a nail gun." We talked about a Buckeye game, to pretend nothing was burning. After we hung up, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. That evening the house switched from afternoon gray to winter dark. I dimmed the lamp and watched the front stoop through the peephole when I heard footsteps on the porch. Tyler's weight on the top step, then a woman's, not Emily. My doorbell cam blinked its red eye. The voices came thin through the glass. Cold does that to sound, but the words crawled under the door anyway. "Off market," he said again. "No disclosures if he's moving into assisted." She murmured something about asses, and he said, "He sleeps all day." Perfect, perfect. I've used that word for conduit runs that look like they were drawn with a ruler. I've used it for late August evenings when my wife would open the kitchen window and let the smell of tomatoes fill the room. I'd never heard it used about me, like I was a schedule to take advantage of. I saved the clip, named it Nothing Special, and dropped it onto the little silver USB in the dish with my wife's old watch. I turned the watch over in my fingers and decided grief and anger are cousins. They both want to shout, and you have to teach them to sit. I didn't confront Tyler. I didn't call my daughter back and ask her who taught her to speak to me like I was a busted toaster. I made a ham sandwich I didn't want and sucked the crumbs off my teeth because the antibiotic said, "with food." I took the sandwich plate to the sink and saw, in the reflection on the window, a thin scuff on the doorframe I didn't remember. Just a smudge of grey at hip height where the paint had been grazed. I wiped it with a dishcloth and it didn't come off. I stared at that scuff too long for what it was, like a man studying a hairline crack in a beam and thinking about rain. Saturday, December 6th. Emily returned with a forced smile and a paper bag of things nobody had asked for. New throw pillows, a scented candle called Winter Hearth. She set them on the coffee table and said, "Tyler thinks buyers like neutral." The word buyers was a rock dropping into a frozen lake. She didn't see the splash. When she went to the kitchen to fuss with the soup again, I lifted the paper bag and felt the crumpled document under it. The home staging estimate, the one with $2,800 at the bottom. I flattened it, read my own name at the top like a stranger's. The handwriting beside the line, "Scope," wasn't mine. "Rentals, depersonalize, curb appeal," it said. Depersonalize. I looked at the family photos on the mantel, at my wife's smile mid-laugh, and felt something in me set when Emily left. She didn't take the bag or the candle. The house smelled like winter hearth anyway. Artificial cinnamon, wrestling the real cumin that lives in the wood from years of chili. I slid the estimate and the lawn invoice into my Bible again, then took them out and wrote the dates at the top in heavier blue, like I could make the paper speak louder. Deck 6, Deck 9. I underlined both. I told myself I was underlining the truth. By late afternoon, the December light was the color of refrigerator milk. I called Mrs. DeLuca and asked, casual as I could, if she'd seen any trucks or photographers. "Yesterday afternoon," she said. "Nice young man with a camera. Wiped his feet like he'd done this 1,000 times. Didn't go in, though." I thanked her, and after I hung up, felt the floor of the story shift. If it wasn't just an idea, if there was already a plan with a schedule and tasks and a man with a camera, then I wasn't paranoid. I was late. That night I couldn't get the word perfect out of my head. I arranged the objects that were mine to command. The pill organizer, the blue pen, the fax schedule, the silver USB in its dish, the 2 papers with their ugly numbers. I put them in a neat line on the coffee table like I was laying conduit in a straight run. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth and heard the house answer with the soft shush of the furnace. The collapse wasn't a single drop. It was a series of small giveaways. The way my daughter looked through me, the way my body refused to obey, the way a stranger's estimate had my name on it in ink that wasn't mine. But I've spent a life fixing things that sag and spark and pretend they're fine until they aren't. You don't argue with a failing line. You shut off the power and you start tracing where the current's going. On Sunday morning, December 7th, I woke before the sun, made a list on the back of a grocery receipt, and underlined the first line, "Collect proof quietly." Not a confrontation, not a speech. Proof. If Tyler wanted off-market, I would go off-microphone. No more talking at the door, no hints that I could hear. I'd be the quiet house that notices everything. I put the list beside the pill organizer and took my antibiotic with toast I didn't want. Then I set the doorbell camera to a higher sensitivity and slid the silver USB into my pocket. The next act of my life was not going to be a man on a couch. The next act was going to be a man with a folder. If you hide a lockbox on my porch, I'll hide a lawyer in your shadow. By Monday, December 9th, my pain had mapped itself into a schedule. Every movement cost about 5 seconds of breath, so I used that rhythm for planning. 3 seconds to push up, 2 to think. I started by printing the $220 lawn crew invoice Emily had forgotten to take from the counter. I slipped it into a manila folder I labeled Home Repairs, Winter. The name was a lie. It was a decoy. The real folder sat inside a drawer under old tax papers, marked only with a strip of blue tape. At 1:30 that afternoon, Frank honked from the curb. He was my union buddy, 68, 2 new knees, the only man I trusted to drive my car. We headed downtown to see Ms. Hargrove, the elder law attorney I'd found, through a local senior legal hotline. Her office smelled like old wood and strong coffee, with paper stacks as tall as confidence. I slid my staging estimate, medicine schedule, and USB-labeled Christmas Reds across her desk. "They're trying to sell my house," I said. While I'm flat on my back, she didn't flinch. She just clicked her pen and started writing on yellow paper. "We'll need 3 things," she said. "Proof of financial exploitation, intent to sell, and a record of your health status." She underlined intent twice. "And Mr. Haynes, don't confront them yet. Just document, quietly." She gave me homework. Call the bank, freeze access, revoke any shared permissions. "Do it first thing tomorrow," she said, "and print everything." That evening, when Frank helped me back into the house, I noticed a faint scuff on the front door frame, about waist high. Grey paint scraped just enough to show wood beneath. I leaned closer and saw it. Small metal burr marks like a keypad had pressed against it. A lockbox. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I took out my old flip phone, the one that still dated photos automatically, and snapped a picture with the timestamp clear in the corner. December 9th, 6:17 p.m. I called Mrs. DeLuca to ask if she'd seen anyone on my porch. A woman in a black parka, she said. Had a clipboard. Around lunch. Realtor. Has to be. That night I opened my laptop. My hands shook, but the work steadied me. I logged into my bank and saw 3 charges that didn't belong. $4,150 on deck 5, $5,000 on deck 7, and $5,000 on deck 9, all to TY Consult, LLC. I stared at the pattern until the numbers blurred. Tyler's initials. I took screenshots, printed them one by one, and slid them into a new section of the blue tape folder. By Tuesday, December 10th, I was back at the bank with those printouts in my coat pocket. Mr. Carr, the fraud investigator, had a way of squinting that made people tell him the truth. He looked at the transfers, tapped a few keys, and said, "Those were electronic, linked to a device registered under your account. But the IP's from another address. My daughter's house," I said. He nodded once and printed a ledger. "We'll open a case number and freeze any future transfers. Don't alert them yet. Let them walk into their own story." He handed me his card and said, "I'll call this what it is, theft under pretense." When I got home, I took another photo of the lockbox. It hadn't moved. I could see the 4 black digits faintly smudged from gloves. Someone had used it recently. Wednesday, December 11th, Ms. Hargrove called. "Good work. Now we need their intent in writing. Check for any emails, ads, or agent correspondence. Realtors talk more than they think." That night, I saw headlights pause outside my house. A sedan idled by the curb, exhaust fogging in the cold. A woman stepped out, pointed her phone at my house, and took a picture. I sat behind the curtain, watching her silhouette vanish into the snow. I opened my notebook and wrote, December 11th, possible realtor scout. Seared on silver. Lockbox still on porch. Next step, confirm listing. By Thursday, December 12th, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a witness. I kept notes of every sound, every shadow, every receipt. I even logged the temperature from the thermostat, 68 degrees, to remind myself that I still controlled something. That night, I played the doorbell recording again, the one from deck 5, at 9:23 p.m. "Off market," Tyler said. "He sleeps all day. Perfect." I let those words loop until anger settled into clarity. Friday, December 13th, I printed that transcript line by line. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I smiled. Because now the current had direction. They wanted quiet exploitation. I'd give them documented exposure. I laid out the evidence like a blueprint. Photo of lockbox, deck 9. Bank transfers totaling $1,450, deck 5-9. Voicemail clip, deck 5. Staging estimate, $2,800. Deck 6. Lawn invoice, 2 to 20, deck 9. And right at the top, I wrote, "Proof lives here." That night, I slept 6 straight hours for the first time since surgery. When I woke up, the wind was rattling the porch rail, and I knew what came next, finding the listing itself. Because if my name was already on a sale, this wasn't just family betrayal anymore. It was fraud written in ink I never touched. People who plan a secret sale always leave a public breadcrumb. By Tuesday, December 17th, I had spent nearly a week collecting my small mountain of paper, proofs that smelled of ink and printer heat. Still, I didn't have the one thing Ms. Hargrove wanted most, intent. Something showing that Tyler or Emily had already put my house into motion. That morning, the proof came knocking. Literally. I was half asleep on the couch when the sound of a camera shutter clicked from outside. 2 more clicks. I pushed myself upright, pain stabbing like electricity through my lower back. Through the blinds, I caught sight of a young man in a red jacket stepping back from my front steps, holding a professional camera. I opened the door and said, "Can I help you?" He startled. Sorry, sir, just taking some listing shots." "Tyler said you'd be napping." My stomach tightened. "Tyler who?" He looked confused, like I'd broken script. "Tyler Morgan. Real nice guy. Said this was an off-market listing for quick cash buyers." Off-market. The word again. I felt my pulse in my scar. You have a card? He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a business card. Chris M., Real Estate Photography. I smiled. Thank you, son. Mind emailing me your invoice? He nodded and scribbled his address on the back. When he left, I closed the door gently, leaned on it until my breath evened out, then wrote the time down, 4:07 p.m. I sat at the dining table with my papers and added this new piece. A photograph order meant someone had officially scheduled pre-listing work. That was the breadcrumb. I called Miss Hargrove right away. We have photos, I said. She didn't even sound surprised. Print that email when it arrives. Then we'll send certified letters to any realtor linked to your property. We'll include an injunction warning. I didn't wait for the email. I called the Hamilton County Recorder's office instead. I'd wired half the county's homes over the years. I knew how to navigate their site better than most. No title changes, no liens. But listings weren't filed there. They lived in the digital backrooms of realtor networks. I needed to catch Tyler's hand in the cookie jar, not just crumbs on the counter. When the photographer's invoice hit my inbox at 6:15 p.m., I printed it twice. Pre-list photos for 1221 Wilcox Avenue. Contact Tyler Morgan, $300 due on delivery. Due date circled, Dec 20, 2024. That same evening, a message from Ms. Hargrove's office popped up, drafting cease and desist letters for any agent involved. Also preparing requests to preserve email correspondence between your daughter and her husband regarding sale of property. Don't engage them directly. Document only. I left my phone charging and just stared at the living room. Every wall here held something I had built with my own hands. I could tell which outlet was grounded perfectly because I'd wired them one by one. My wife used to call the house the fifth family member, and now my daughter was trying to sell it to strangers. That night, I scrolled through the doorbell camera feed again. At 8:46 p.m., it caught Tyler stepping onto the porch, wearing his black puffer jacket. He reached down and fiddled with the lockbox. "He'll never know," he whispered. A female voice, Emily's, answered, "He's on meds. He barely moves." I paused the playback, rewound, and wrote every word down in blue ink. The clip alone was enough to bury them, but I wasn't ready yet. Evidence works best when it builds like a storm. On day 18, Ms. Hargrove mailed out 2 certified letters, one to the brokerage suspected of handling the off-market deal, and one to Tyler himself. I watched the postman drop the envelopes into the blue bin outside the Kroger on Glenway Avenue. Proof had officially left the driveway. That same evening, when the last light left the sky, I stepped outside for the first time in days. The cold cut through my coat. I stood in front of my porch, staring at the small black lockbox hanging from the rail. It looked smug. I bent down, memorized the faint smudges on its keypad, and wrote the numbers on my palm. 4 digits, my guess at their code. Inside, I sat at my table and pulled out a sticky note. On it, I wrote in my wife's handwriting, copied carefully from an old recipe card, "Check the cinnamon." I stuck it on the fridge where Emily would see it next visit. It meant nothing to her, but to me it was a signal. She'd never noticed that I'd started leaving decoys. Friday morning, Dec 20, a new envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside, a printed Ez's offer for my property. $699 Cash buyer offer expires December 31st. A single word circled in blue pen. Amenable. Amenable. My jaw clenched so tight my neck spasmed. That wasn't my handwriting. It was Tyler's neat, straight business script. I placed the offer on the table beside the $2,800 staging estimate and the $220 lawn invoice, 3 pillars of their scheme. I took a deep breath and stacked them neatly, face down. My father used to say, "Don't swing when you're mad, son. Measure twice, cut once." That night I didn't sleep. I wrote my next step in the notebook. Lockbox removal after letters, confirmed, delivered. File fraud complaint. Wait for Tyler to show his face. Before midnight, I texted Ms. Hargrove one line. The offer came. "We're moving to phase 2. Her reply came minutes later. "Understood. Collect the envelope. Bring it Monday. We'll freeze their deal before Christmas. I looked at the photo of my wife on the mantel and whispered, "We'll save the house, hun." The heater kicked on in reply, the steady hum sounding almost like a heartbeat. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent, covering the lockbox like a shroud. The first time I changed the locks, I changed the story. By December 23rd, the winter light was thin and metallic, the kind that makes everything look colder than it feels. I stood by the front door with a locksmith named Ron, a quiet man with forearms like tree trunks. "We're keeping the hardware?" he asked. "No," I said. "Start fresh." He drilled the old deadbolt, the one Tyler's key still fit, and replaced it with a new quickset that gleamed like armor. When he finished, I handed him 175s in cash and watched him twist the last screw. "Merry Christmas," he said. "You too," I answered. But neither of us smiled. When he left, I texted Emily and Tyler in the family group chat. "Bank advised a security update. New lock code is 8427. 2 minutes later, Tyler replied, "Overreacting. We'll talk after the holidays," then a thumbs-up emoji. The modern way of closing a door without slamming it. At 3:45 that same afternoon, Mrs. DeLuca shuffled over from across the street, holding a printout. "You might want to see this, Jim," she said. It was in my recycling. Emily must have slipped it into my mail pile. It was an email chain, printed on her office printer paper. Subject, as is offer, 1221. Wilcox Avenue amount, $609.95, $842. From client services edgerealtors.com to Tyler Morgan CC, Emily Morgan. Note, we can move fast before winter slows showings. At the bottom, in blue pen, Tyler had circled the number and scribbled, "He's amenable." That word again, amenable, like a tattoo I never agreed to. I thanked Mrs. DeLuca, made her promise not to mention it to anyone, and slid the printout into the thick envelope now living inside my freezer under a bag of frozen peas. Cold keeps paper dry, and paranoia keeps old men careful. That night, the doorbell camera caught another scene. Emily on the porch, shoulders shaking under her parka. "We have to close before he changes his mind," she whispered, voice trembling. Tyler's reply came, low and impatient. "He won't. He can't. He's on painkillers half the time." The timestamp in the corner read December 24th, 11:02 p.m. I saved the clip, titled it silentnight.mp4, and transferred it to the silver USB labeled Christmas Reds. By December 26th, I was back on the phone with Mr. Carr from the bank. "We're escalating the fraud claim," he said. "All 3 transfers, $49.50 total, are now officially under investigation. I've frozen the old account." I thanked him, then went to the kitchen and withdrew $60 cash from the new account, my first withdrawal in weeks. The receipt printed with the new balance and date. I placed it inside the folder, a small proof of control returning to me. That same day, I met Ms. Hargrove again downtown. Her office was quiet, except for the sound of her paralegal typing. I laid the email printout and the as-is offer on her desk. She adjusted her glasses, reading slowly. "They've gone from manipulation to misrepresentation," she said. "We'll file a temporary restraining order on any sale or transfer and a fraud complaint through the county court. You'll need to sign an affidavit by morning." "Do I tell them?" I asked. She shook her head. "Let the sheriff deliver it. Nothing louder than paper served cold." When I got home, I noticed something missing from the shelf. One of my wife's photo frames, the one from our 25th anniversary. Emily must have taken it during her last visit. She'd said she wanted to dust. I stood there staring at the empty spot and realized grief has levels. Losing someone to death is one kind of silence. Losing someone who's still breathing is another. By December 29th, everything was in motion. Ms. Hargrove's assistant emailed me confirmation that the restraining order filing was scheduled for January 22nd, first available court date after the holidays. "We'll lock the sale before they can even find a buyer," she wrote. That night, I pulled the envelope from the freezer and spread everything on the kitchen table like a detective from one of those shows I used to fall asleep to. $2,800 staging estimate, Deck 6, $220. Lawn invoice, deck 9, 14,950 bank transfers, deck 5-9, 699 840 tellers. Offer email, deck 20, lockbox photo, deck 9. Porch recording, deck 24, each paper, each number, each detail told the same story. I had been written out of my own life. I changed the locks again the next morning, this time not because of fear, but because I wanted to feel the sound of new metal catching. It's strange how powerful that click can feel when you've spent weeks being left open. Standing on my porch, I looked across the quiet street, snow soft under the streetlight. Somewhere out there, Tyler was probably planning his next move. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of his plans. I was ready for court. I was ready to let the truth speak, document by document, and deep down I knew, if they wanted to turn my house into profit, they'd have to face the man who built every outlet, every beam, every bolt with his own hands. They thought I was an old man with stitches. They forgot I was also an electrician, and I was about to turn the power back on. They thought the buyer was their audience, the judge was mine. By January 3rd, the new year came in quietly, like it was trying not to wake the trouble that December had left behind. Snow softened the noise of the neighborhood. But I'd learned that silence doesn't mean peace, it just means someone's plotting quietly. That morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. Open house Sunday, 2-4. We'll handle everything. I stared at the text for a full minute, then typed back one line. There will be no open house. He replied with a shrug emoji. No words, no apology, just digital arrogance. I didn't text again. Instead, I drove to Ms. Hargrove's office for the first time since before Christmas. The roads were slick. My lower back protested every bump. When I arrived, she was waiting with a stack of papers as thick as a phone book. We're sending this today, she said, tapping the top sheet. Formal demand letter to the buyer's agent, complete with your surgeon's note, the fraud complaint, and your bank investigator's affidavit. We're warning them that any sale or contact attempt will trigger civil penalties. She smiled, the kind lawyers give when they know they've loaded the chamber. We're also attaching the staging estimate, the as-is offer, and the USB transcript of that porch conversation. That's our triangle of truth. 2 hours. Later, I watched her assistant feed the envelope into the certified mail slot. The clerk stamped the tracking slip, Jan 6, 2025, 11:18 a.m. That sound, thud of rubber on paper, felt better than pain meds. That night I decided it was time to see Emily face to face. I texted her, come by Friday for dinner, chili like Mum used to make. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, like her husband had taught her. When Friday came, January 10th, I spent the morning chopping onions, slow and steady. Every move was deliberate, every clink of the knife on the cutting board grounding me. The chili simmered by noon, filling the house with cumin and memory. I even set 2 bowls out on the table like I used to when my wife was alive. When Emily arrived, she hesitated at the door. You changed the locks again? Security, I said. Come in, you'll like the smell. She sat fiddling with her spoon while the steam curled between us. Dad, she started, Tyler's been handling everything. You shouldn't be so stressed. We were just trying to make life easier for you. Easier for me, I repeated. Or for him. Her eyes flicked toward the framed photo of her mother on the mantel. We could finally get our own place, she said softly. There it was, the slip. Our own place. I leaned back in my chair, feeling my back brace push against the wood. So my house would buy yours, she didn't answer. Her spoon traced small circles in the chili, leaving red rings on the bowl. I watched her, memorizing the way guilt makes people small. I placed a recorder on the table, not hidden, just sitting next to the salt shaker. You mind if I record this? She looked startled. Why? For my physical therapy journal, I said. Doctor wants me to track conversations, says it helps with memory. She nodded, unsure, and the recorder caught her saying the words that would save me later. We were just going to list it, Dad. We didn't think you'd mind if it sold fast. When she left that night, she hugged me tightly, too tightly, like a goodbye she didn't understand. I locked the door behind her and stared at the blinking red light on the recorder. That confession, plain, careless, human, was better than any document. The next morning, January 11th, I woke to find a yellow sticky note on my desk. "We'll manage this better for you." My binder labeled scholarship fund had been moved. I hadn't left it there. Emily must have peeked inside, seen the fund. My wife and I saved for trade school kids and realized there was more money than she thought. I took a picture of the note next to the day's newspaper. Proof again. By January 14th, Ms. Hargrove called with a tone I'd learned to respect. "Subpoenas are out," she said. "We'll get every email from the broker's system by end of week. Their digital trail will hang them before they even step into court." "Good," I said, "because they're still pretending I'm sleeping through it." That night, I drove to Frank's house. We sat in his garage, sipping weak coffee under the smell of oil and dust. I handed him a copy of my latest papers, the sticky note photo, the recorded confession, the buyer's offer, all bundled neatly. "Hold this," I said. "If anything happens before court, you give it to Hargrove." He nodded. "You always did overbuild your circuits." "Better than a fire," I replied. On January 17th, Ms. Hargrove emailed again. The buyer's agent responded, "My client relied on your representatives." I stared at that line for a long time. Relied on your representatives. That was legalese for, "We believed the daughter and son-in-law had the right." That was the final nail. The night before the hearing, January 21st, I sat alone at the kitchen table and laid out the last of my evidence like a soldier polishing medals. Sticky note photo, Jan 11, recorded confession, Jan 10, buyers. Agent email, Jan the 17, fraud ledger, deck 10, as is offer, deck 20. The chili pot still sat on the stove, cold now, a thin layer of fat on top like wax sealing an old letter. I whispered to the quiet kitchen, "Tomorrow we bring it all home." When I switched off the light, I caught my reflection in the window. The man staring back didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like someone who'd stopped apologizing for being awake. When the clerk said, "All rise," my house stood up with me. January 22nd, 2025. The sky over downtown Cincinnati looked like wet steel. I sat stiff in the courtroom pew, my back brace creaking as I straightened. Ms. Hargrove adjusted her blazer beside me, her legal pad stacked with tabs, blue for evidence, yellow for witnesses, red for the kill shots. Across the aisle, Tyler wore a gray suit that didn't fit right. Emily sat 2 chairs from him, eyes down, hands wringing her purse strap until the leather squeaked. Judge Hayes entered, a small man with kind eyes and the patience of granite. "Case 24-1319, Haynes versus Morgan," the clerk announced. That was me. My name had become a case file. Ms. Hargrove began calmly. "Your Honor, this is a matter of elder exploitation, financial misrepresentation, and unauthorized attempts to sell the petitioner's primary residence." She motioned for me to stand, and my spine protested but obeyed. "Mr. Haynes is a retired electrician, post-operative, recovering from spinal fusion. While medicated and homebound in December, his daughter and son-in-law initiated the sale of his house for personal gain." Judge Hayes nodded, flipping through the first folder. "Proceed," the defense attorney, slick hair, practiced voice, said. "Your Honor, the defendants were merely helping Mr. Haynes transition into assisted living." There was confusion, not coercion. I almost laughed. Confusion doesn't have a lockbox code. Ms. Hargrove opened with the first proof, the bank ledger from Mr. Carr. 3 transfers totaling $14,950, all to a company owned solely by Tyler Morgan. She held it up. Each transaction occurred while the petitioner was under post-surgical medication. Carr testified by speakerphone. His voice came steady, unbothered. "We flagged the transfers December 21st. Patterns inconsistent with Mr. Haynes's prior activity. Device used was located at the Morgan's address. Then came the $2,800 staging estimate, my name forged at the top. The $220 loan invoice, the as is offer for $680,842. And finally the USB. Miss Hargrove handed it to the bailiff, who slid it into the court laptop. The audio filled the room. Tyler's voice, low and confident. Off-market. No disclosures if he's moving into assisted. Then Emily's whisper, he sleeps all day, perfect. The words hung there, floating over the quiet cough of the courtroom heater. Emily covered her face. Tyler stared straight ahead, jaw locked. Ms. Hargrove didn't gloat. She simply turned to the judge. The petitioner never authorized any sale, never granted power of attorney, and was never notified of these activities. The defendants used access to his home and financial information for personal benefit. The judge leaned forward. Did you have written authority to act for your father-in-law, Mr. Morgan? Tyler shifted. No, Your Honor, but there's no but in unauthorized, Judge Hayes said. His voice stayed calm, which made it sharper. Emily finally spoke, voice trembling. We didn't mean harm. We thought it was time for him to move somewhere safer. Safer? Ms. Hargrove repeated. With his assets in your husband's company account? The defense lawyer objected, argumentative. But Judge Hayes waved him off. Overruled. Then Ms. Hargrove pulled out the photo of the lockbox. Taken December 9th on the petitioner's porch. Installed without consent. Contained spare key. Code identified from smudge pattern later confirmed by locksmith records. Mr. Haynes, the judge asked, what did you feel when you found this? I hesitated. My voice came quieter than I expected. Like my own daughter had picked the lock on our memories. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Miss Hargrove placed her final document on the stand, the surgeon's faxed medication chart, showing my dosage schedule and recovery status. At the time of these transfers and listing activities, she said, the petitioner was under prescribed narcotics, physically incapacitated, and medically advised not to make major decisions. The judge read the sheet, adjusted his glasses, then turned to Tyler. Mr. Morgan, do you realize what this looks like? Tyler exhaled sharply. We were trying to help. We were drowning in debt, yes, but we didn't mean to hurt him. And yet, the judge said, tapping the desk with his pen, you took nearly $15,000 and listed a home that wasn't yours. Silence. Only the faint hiss of the vent. Miss Hargrove stepped back, hands folded. Your Honor, we ask for immediate injunctive relief, prohibiting any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of Mr. Haynes's property, restitution of all funds, and legal fees incurred. Judge Hayes nodded slowly, writing. Granted, pending review. The defense attorney began to protest, but the judge raised a hand. Mr. Morgan, you'll cease all representation of this property as of now. Funds will be frozen until restitution is complete. He looked at Emily. You may wish to seek separate counsel. Then he turned to me. Mr. Haynes, anything you'd like to say before I issue the order? I gripped the edge of the bench for balance. Just this, Your Honor. My house is more than wooden nails. It's where I buried my wife's ashes under the lilac bush. It's where I taught my daughter to ride her bike. I didn't think I'd have to defend it from my own family. But here we are. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even the court reporter's typing paused. Then Judge Hayes signed the temporary restraining order, his pen scratching like a saw cutting through old wood. Injunction issued. Full restitution to follow pending review of the fraud claim. This court finds preliminary evidence of exploitation. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper, thud, was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. Tyler's lawyer whispered something, but Tyler just stared at the table. Emily looked at me with eyes that finally seemed to see me again. Too late. As the bailiff collected the files, Ms. Hargrove leaned over and said quietly, You did it, Jim. The house is safe. I nodded. Still staring ahead. Not just the house, I said. The truth, too. When we walked out into the gray afternoon, the wind off the Ohio River cut like a clean blade. Cold, but honest. For the first time since surgery, I stood straight without wincing. Justice, it turned out, was good for the spine. The house got quiet. The phones got loud. That night after court, when I pushed my door open, the house exhaled like it had been holding its breath all month. I set the manila envelope on the kitchen table, the one with the judge's stamp, Miss Hargrove's card, and the new court order, and I just stared at it. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, wind rattled the screen door, but inside, everything was still. At 9:17 p.m., my phone lit up. Emily. Dad, we just wanted to help. We didn't mean. I cut her off. Emily, stop! Help doesn't come with a price tag or a forged signature, she sniffled. We didn't think you'd still want that big house. I built that big house, I said quietly. And your mother died in it. So yes, I want it. I hung up before she could reply. A few minutes later, a new text arrived from Tyler. No apology. Just 2 words. You won. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. The next morning, January 24th, my inbox pinged. Ms. Hargrove had forwarded an email from the buyer's agent. Our client withdraws their offer effective immediately. They relied on representations made by unauthorized parties. There it was. The sale was dead. I printed that email, date and time bold at the top, and added it to my Proof Lives Here folder. 2 days later, January 26th, the bank confirmed in writing that $9,950 of the $14,950 had been recovered and returned to my new account. The remaining $5,000 was frozen under investigation, but Mr. Carr sounded confident on the phone. It'll come back your way soon, Mr. Haynes. Paper doesn't lie, neither do recordings, I said. And he chuckled. January 27th, Miss Hargrove filed a civil claim for the rest of the funds, plus $3,200 in legal fees. I didn't even have to leave my couch. She texted me a copy of the filing stamped received. Seeing that blue court seal on my phone felt better than any medicine bottle. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, no makeup, red eyes, shoulders slumped under a thick parka. She looked small. For the first time since the surgery, she looked like my kid again. I didn't know about the LLC, she said softly. Tyler said it was just a way to keep track of repairs. I studied her face. Repairs, I repeated. Is that what we call theft now? She swallowed hard. Dad, I'm sorry. I was scared. The bills, the house, everything felt too big. I nodded slowly. It's big because it's real. Responsibility always is. We stood in the doorway for a long moment. Behind her, snow fell in thick flakes that muffled the world. Finally, I said, "You can come in, but we're not talking about excuses." She stepped inside, shivering. I poured her tea, set it down between us, and pulled the binder labeled Scholarship Fund from the counter. "This," I said, tapping the cover, "stays. No one touches it. Your mother wanted this money to send some kid to trade school every spring. That's what it'll do. Not buy houses or cars or pay anyone's debts," she nodded, tears running silently now. "I understand." I slid an envelope toward her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the judge's order. "This protects me, Emily, from Tyler, from anyone, including you if you forget yourself again." She didn't look angry, just hollow. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "I hate what you did, but I love you enough to make sure you can't do it again." When she left, the air in the house felt cleaner, colder, honest. I stood by the door, watching her walk down the driveway, head bowed, hands in pockets. The porch light reflected off the wet snow, making it sparkle like the world had been freshly wiped down. On January 30th, Miss Hargrove called to confirm the restraining order is permanent now. "Jim, they can't touch your property, not even with a thought." I thanked her. And before hanging up, she said something that stuck with me. "You'd be surprised, Mr. Haynes. Most people never make it to court. They give up. You didn't." After we hung up, I went to the hardware store with the $50 a gift card the buyer had mailed earlier. I bought a new smoke detector and a sturdy brass door viewer. It wasn't about security anymore. It was about finality. That evening, Frank came over with coffee and notarized a revocation letter, an official end to any informal permissions I'd ever given Emily or Tyler. I signed it. He stamped it, and we both sat there listening to the kettle whistle. When he left, I walked through each room, kitchen, hallway, living room. and flipped every light switch on one by one. The house glowed like it was waking up after a long nap. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all, not just the wood and mortar, but the sense of self that lives between those walls. That night, I slept 8 uninterrupted hours, the court order sitting on my nightstand like a silent guard, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream about betrayal. I dreamed about wiring, about circuits done right, glowing steady, never sparking again. Justice isn't loud, it keeps receipts. By the first week of February 2025, the Ohio River had thawed just enough to reflect the weak sunlight. I woke to the soft rattle of mail through the slot and found a letter from Ms. Hargrove's office. Inside was the final order from Judge Hayes, stamped, signed, sealed. The court had approved full restitution of the remaining $5,000, plus $3,200 in attorney's fees. At the bottom, in careful script, the judge had written one line that felt like both warning and benediction. Pattern of opportunism while the petitioner was post-operative. It wasn't poetry, but it was truth. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Emily had once laid down her first report card, and I'd said, "You did good, kid." Now I laid down a court order and whispered the same thing to myself. Ms. Hargrove called just after noon. "It's done, Jim. The house, the funds, everything's locked down. You're officially the only name that matters on those papers." I laughed, quiet but real. "Feels strange to be the headline in my own life again," she chuckled. "Most people don't win these cases. You did because you kept paper. Remember that. Memory fades, receipts don't." After we hung up, I opened a small notebook I'd started the night my daughter said, "We are not your servants." On the first page I'd written in thick blue pen, "Collect proof quietly." On the last page I added one more line, "Proof became peace." That afternoon I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the trade school where my wife used to volunteer before she got sick. I told the receptionist I wanted to set up the first $2,500 scholarship in her name, the Marjorie Haynes Electricians Award, for any student learning a trade that used their hands and their heart. When I told her the funds were coming from a legal settlement, the woman on the line went quiet for a second, then said, "That's the best kind of justice I've ever heard of." Mr. Haynes, the second call was to the surgeon's office. I asked if they could forward a thank you card to the nurse who faxed my medication schedule back on December 5th, the one piece of paper that anchored the entire case. "Tell her she didn't just save a back," I said. "She helped save a home." Later that week, February 8th, a message from Emily appeared on my phone. A wall of text, long, emotional, raw. She apologized for everything, said she'd fired her lawyer, said she couldn't sleep thinking about what she'd done. There were true words inside, but also excuses. "Tyler pushed me. I thought you were lonely. I panicked. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I typed back, 'I love you.' Boundaries stand. 3 words she'd have to live with. We started seeing each other once a week again. Fridays at noon, at my kitchen table. No lawyers, no documents. Just tea, sometimes sandwiches, always space. She would bring her own mug, never touched my cabinets again, and that was enough. Tyler didn't come. He sent his restitution through his attorney in 2 installments, both with cashier's checks. I kept copies, of course, not to gloat, just because I'd learned the value of proof. By February 15th, I'd fallen back into my small routines. Morning news, 2 cups of coffee, short walks to stretch the spine. I even started wiring small birdhouses in the garage for the trade school fundraiser. Frank dropped by one afternoon, saw the stack of finished ones and grinned. "You turning this into a side hustle?" I smiled. "Nah, just rebuilding what's mine, 1 box at a time." On the counter behind me sat the file marked "Closed Chapters." Inside it, the A's offer, the lockbox photo, the staging estimate, the court order stamped and signed. Could have burned them, but I didn't. Paper doesn't just prove wrongdoing, it proves survival. That night, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the streetlights glow through the fog. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor was putting out their trash early. The smell of coal and diesel filled the air. I thought about the words Miss Hargrove had said in court. You can't sell a man who's already paid for his freedom. Justice had come, not in fireworks or fury, but in signatures, stamps, and silence. And silence, I realized, could finally mean peace again. Once a house survives a sale that never happened, it learns your name again. March rolled in soft and grey. The river mist hung low in the mornings, the kind that blurs the edges of houses until they look like memories. I woke each day to the same quiet, but it was a better quiet, earned, not forced. The lock clicked differently now. Maybe it was just the new metal, or maybe it was me. I started writing new lists, not of evidence, but of maintenance. Replace furnace filter. March 8th, check smoke detector batteries. March 12th, tighten the porch rail. March 15th. It felt good to see plans that didn't involve lawyers or hearings. Frank dropped by one morning with his thermos of too strong coffee. So, what's next for you? He asked, leaning against the counter like we were back on a job site. I pointed to the pile of envelopes on the table, utility bills, a property tax form, and a fresh schedule for my physical therapy sessions at the Mercy Health Center. Normal, I said. That's what's next. He grinned. Normal looks good on you. That week, I went to the credit union downtown, where a financial counselor named Gina walked me through a new plan. She helped me link alerts to my accounts, any withdrawal over $500, any address change. Everything on paper, nothing by promise, she said. I liked that line so much, I wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside of my wallet. When I came home, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and wood polish. The last traces of winter hearth candle had finally faded. I walked room to room, touching the walls like a man reacquainting himself with an old friend. 2 days later, March 12th, Frank returned with a fireproof safe and installed it in my hall closet. Together we loaded it with the things that had nearly been stolen: the deed, the court order, the USB labeled Christmas Reds, the bank letters. The nurse's fax chart. I wrote one list on the inside of the closet door: who has no keys. It felt petty but satisfying. March 18th, Emily came by with a small bakery box and a sheepish smile. Cinnamon rolls, she said. Mum's recipe. Thought you might want some. I let her in. The smell hit first: warm sugar, butter, nostalgia. She sat at the kitchen table, twisting a napkin in her hands. How are you? Still here, I said. She nodded. Tyler and I, well, there's not really a Tyler and I anymore. I didn't say I was surprised. I wasn't. Some foundations can't be repaired once the rot's exposed. We ate in silence for a while. Then she said, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, really looked. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry, no practiced smile. No, I said slowly. I hate what you did. But hate's not the point. The point is what you do next. She nodded, eyes shining. I'm going back to work at the clinic, and I'll help with the scholarship fund if you'll let me. I won't touch a dollar, just help with the paperwork. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, we'll start with tea next week. One step at a time. When she left, the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt lived in. Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror and realized the man staring back didn't look beaten down anymore. The lines around my eyes were still there, sure, but they looked earned, not carved by worry. I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my notebook to a fresh page. On the top I wrote, "Things worth keeping," and under it I listed honesty, boundaries, receipts, cinnamon rolls. Then I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. That night I sat by the window, the March wind pushing against the glass, and thought about something the judge had said before he left the bench. Paper holds people accountable, but forgiveness holds them human. I wasn't sure yet about forgiveness, but I was learning. The house, too, was learning me again. every creak in the floor, every light switch, every quiet moment between breaths, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't scare me. It sounded like peace finding its way home. The buyer sent a letter I framed next to the injunction. It arrived on April 3rd, a plain white envelope tucked between utility bills. I almost tossed it, thinking it was another insurance offer, but the return address caught my eye. Edge Realtors, LLC. My heart stuttered. I slit it open carefully, as if the paper might still bite. Inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Haynes, we're relieved the court protected you. We had no idea the sale wasn't authorized. You dodged a bullet, and so did we. We hope you keep the house that was always yours. Enclosed is a small gift for your home. K. Reynolds, Edge Realtors. Taped to the bottom was a $50 hardware store gift card. I laughed. Out loud, not a bitter laugh, something cleaner. I went straight to Harrington's Hardware that afternoon and bought a new brass door viewer, a reinforced strike plate, and a small plaque for the entryway that read, Home of James and Marjorie Haynes, 1994 forever. While I drilled the new viewer in, I noticed the faint scratch still etched into the wood where the lockbox once hung. The tiny groove ran vertical, barely visible unless the light caught it just right. I thought about sanding it down, painting over it, erasing the scar completely. But I didn't. Instead, I polished around it and left it there, a quiet reminder of what almost was. Some marks aren't damage. They're memory. That evening, the air was warm enough to open a window. The smell of lilacs drifted in from the bush, where I'd scattered my wife's ashes 10 years ago. The house seemed to breathe with me. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where this whole storm started, and took out a small yellow sticky note. I wrote a single line and placed it inside my safe. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. I wasn't writing it for Emily or Tyler. I was writing it for the man I used to be, the one who apologized for taking up space in his own house, the one who mistook silence for peace and family for trust. That man was gone. Later, I poured myself a cup of coffee, the late sun spilling gold across the counter, and hit record on my phone. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. I told the story, not for sympathy, not for revenge, but for anyone sitting on their own couch right now, wondering if the people they love are quietly selling them out. I said, if you're listening to this, and you've ever been made to feel like a burden, remember, boundaries aren't cruelty. They're care turned inward. Keep your papers, keep your locks, keep your dignity. You can rebuild everything else from there. I looked around the kitchen, the blue folder still thick with documents, the court order in its frame, the light catching the brass viewer on the door. The hum in my back was still there, faint and constant, but it had a new rhythm now. Less pain, more reminder, like the low voltage you feel from a live wire that's properly grounded. It tells you the system's working. Outside, the evening settled into quiet. The house held its heat, and for the first time in months I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to knock. The story was over. The lesson wasn't justice, I learned. Doesn't always arrive with applause. It arrives with paperwork, healed scars, and the calm click of a door locking from the inside. And when I turned off the lights, the silence that followed didn't sound empty. It sounded like home.